A federal judge has ruled that a lawsuit against Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene will be allowed to move forward, which could possibly prevent her from running for re-election. If you watch this show or know me, you could probably guess how I feel about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think even if you are a Republican or conservative, you should be ashamed to have her representing you. But with that being said, my feeling on this particular subject might be different than you'd expect. So let's get into the specifics. One of the things a couple different groups have tried to do following January 6th is use the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which was put in after the Civil War, and states that someone who was a part of an insurrection can't then run for office. The idea was to keep people who had fought for the South and were insurrectionists from holding power in the federal government. But what these groups are trying to do is say, because January 6th was an insurrection, then people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Madison Cawthorn, who are very supportive of those people, and possibly there's some questions around if they helped coordinate that day, if they should be prevented under the 14th Amendment from running for re-election because they can't hold office as a insurrectionist. That's kind of the argument they're trying to make. So in the specific case of Marjorie Taylor Greene, reading from The Guardian, the challenge from a group of Georgia voters says Greene should be disqualified under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution because she supported insurrectionists who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021. So there's definitely something there. I mean, I think most people agree. Maybe you don't use the word insurrection, but there was a riot that was meant to prevent the certification of Joe Biden. So you're trying to overturn the results of an election through a riot. That's pretty insurrection-y. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has come out and said the people who got locked up from that are political prisoners, and she supported a lot of the claims that led these people to doing what they did. So that's what this group of Georgia voters are basing their lawsuit around. This congresswoman supported rhetorically and possibly in coordination with people who did a riot, stormed the Capitol in the hopes of overturning the results of an election. And because of that, she shouldn't be allowed to run for re-election. One of the things that they feel links Greene enough to these insurrectionists is the fact that not only did she give moral and rhetorical support to these insurrectionists, but reports have come out showing, quote, Greene has been widely linked to events on January 6th. In one example, an organizer of pro-Trump events in Washington that day told Rolling Stone Greene was among a group of far-right Republicans who coordinated with protesters. Quote, I remember Marjorie Taylor Greene specifically, the anonymous source said. I remember talking to probably close to a dozen other members at one point or another, or their staffs. So that's where it gets a little iffy in my mind. There's a big difference between coordinating for the Trump rally or even a protest at the Capitol and directly coordinating to storm the Capitol. And while I think we all kind of know in our hearts she definitely was supportive of those people, and on that day she voted against certification, so she definitely did what all those people storming the Capitol wanted her to do. But there's a difference between how we feel in our heart, like she supports them probably, and what she actually materially did that could be called supporting insurrectionists. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, a federal judge has ruled that this can move forward, so it's not set in stone yet. She's not prevented from running for re-election as of now, but it is allowed to move forward, which is definitely not what Marjorie Taylor Greene is probably hoping for. So before I give my specific take on how I feel about this, let's go ahead and give Marjorie Taylor Greene a chance to respond in this video.
Trying to take away my district's right to vote for me. Well, I have to tell you, their lawsuit is such a scam. It is so ridiculous. I mean, it's obvious they've never read the Constitution before. We're going to beat them, and we're going to come back, and not only are we going to be on defense right now and win, but we're coming back and we'll be going on offense.
So again, I very much dislike Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think her rhetoric is terribly damaging. I think her policy positions are damaging. All of those things. She's also just kind of off the rails in her presentation. But I actually don't want this to work. If it does, there's going to be a little part of me that's like, yay, she can't run for re-election. But to me, because it's not super clear, it's not like she was storming the Capitol or clear evidence that she was telling people, okay, you're gonna come, make sure you break through the window and try to kill Nancy Pelosi. She didn't get that specifically involved in the coordination of that day. And so there's some gray area, and I really don't want us to get in a place in this country where people's voices aren't able to be heard because the legal system kind of stepped in, if that makes sense. And so if she's prevented from running, I mean, that is not giving her district a chance to have their voices heard. Of course, there are some very clear cases where you legally shouldn't be allowed to run, but this to me is blurry enough where you're setting a pretty bad precedent and also giving so much energy, passion, rage to the right about preventing one of their favorite congresswomen from running. Democrats kind of getting tricky to prevent her from running because they can't stop her otherwise. And she would become the biggest martyr ever. I think her voice would get even bigger. You know, she would be all over the media. And so while I would very much like to see her not in Congress, the idea of her being prevented from running in a case that it definitely isn't just an easy case to win makes me feel a little bit weird. And even if I looked a lot into the law and realized, okay, you could actually have a good argument for preventing her from running, I think optically and politically, that's actually going to give even more energy to the Republican base. And also, she was as supportive as a lot of Congress people, so they should all be prevented from being in office if this were to go through. To sum it up, I think this would be seen as a highly political move, which, because again, it's not as clear as her being an actual insurrectionist, which, to be clear, even though I think it's reprehensible that she voted against certifying the election, she's been spreading all these lies, she definitely encouraged these insurrectionists. Because there's some fuzziness to this, I just don't think it's worth it, honestly. But we'll see. As I mentioned, it is being allowed to move forward by that federal judge, so we'll keep up with it, and maybe that'll be the end of Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress. Here's what else you need to know today. The suspect of the Brooklyn subway shooting who shot 10 people has been arrested by NYPD. The United States will send $800 million more in military and other security aid to Ukraine. Finland and Sweden are considering joining NATO, which makes a lot of sense as they observe this war happen. And finally, Elon Musk will no longer be joining the Twitter board after that was previously announced following his acquisition of 9% stake in Twitter. Be well, everybody.